Shalom from Jerusalem. This is Israel's TV News 7 and our monthly program, Powers in Play. And we have a distinguished group. So because each of them is even more distinguished than his neighbor, we'll do it alphabetically. Dr. Uzi Arad, formerly a National Security Advisor, head of the National Security Staff, earlier a division chief at Mossad. Dr. Arad, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Ambassador and former Deputy Foreign Minister Danny Ayalon, welcome.
Thank you.
Doctor and retired Colonel Eran Lerman, formerly with military intelligence and the National Security Staff, where you have been the deputy head, if you forgot, just to mention it.
I never forget who gave me the job.
And the longest title, Reserve Brigadier General Dr. Amnon Sofrin, formerly a senior military intelligence officer and formerly the head of the intelligence division at Mossad. Welcome to you, Amnon.
Thank you very much.
So, because you were last, you will begin.
Okay.
The last will be the first, as someone said many years ago. Our topic is deterrence. And deterrence, from conception to perception, not an immaculate conception, but nevertheless, is in our brains, in the way we see our enemies, adversaries, sometimes partners, doesn't have to be right. And while after the Second World War, this has been a major tenet of the game of nations. Obviously, the entire Cold War was built on American and Soviet perceptions of each other being deterred from doing something. If we take it to our own region, this was obviously one of the three major tenets of Ben-Gurion's Israel's defense doctrine. What has happened to deterrence if we look back? Less than 14 months ago, Israel was certain that Hamas, which was considered the least of its enemies compared to Iran and Hezbollah, how come Israel believed Hamas was deterred, and it turned out, unfortunately, that it wasn't?
First of all, deterrence is something that is very sneaky because it's something that is in your brain, in your conception, and not really the reality. The way you believe that your enemy is acting because of your power, because of your threats, because of your capabilities. That's first. Second, it's not only the 2023. If you go back to 1973, it goes well. The same. We had the same concept that the Egyptians are deterred, that they won't be able to cross the Suez Canal and to attack on the east flank of Suez Canal. And nevertheless, it happened. So they weren't deterred, and they had the capability to do it and to act upon that, of course. Now, if you look at 2023, we said that Hamas is deterred because of two main reasons. The first one is the fact that they didn't take an active part when we attacked the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. On 3 occasions, we launched attacks on Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and Hamas set aside and gave us the feeling that it doesn't want to take an active part because of deterrence.
Hamas was in control of the Gaza Strip. Palestinian Islamic Jihad was its minor partner.
Yeah. And nevertheless, they didn't really take an active part, and they let us handle the issues with the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And in our concept, we said, Hamas is deterred. He doesn't want to go into a large conflict with Israel. And therefore, they stay aside and they don't take an active part. And this is for us a sign that they are deterred. They don't want to launch a war. They focus on what we call the economical prospects for the public, for the residents. And therefore, nothing to worry about.
Dr. Lerman, obviously, even if deterrence was in effect at one time. It is temporary, conditional, limited, and
Wasting asset.
yes, and if the other side is planning a surprise attack, and if the other side is sophisticated, he will try to feed you the wrong impression. Is it possible? Because in both examples which General Sofrin brought up, 73 and 23, the other side, Egypt and then Hamas, let Israel believe that certain conditions have not been met yet, and therefore that Israel can be complacent for the time being.
Well, I've just written a piece for the Jerusalem Institute of Strategy and Security on deterrence and the idea that maybe we should dismiss the concept altogether. It doesn't work. And the whole Ben Gurion structure, which it wasn't Ben Gurion's really, people deduced it from his thinking, is no longer relevant. And there's one thing I agree. We should put much more emphasis on defense, on being able to meet contingencies regardless of whether deterrence works or not. But the story but you cannot let go of deterrence. Deterrence is the capacity to sustain our life in a normal manner here on a daily basis, year after year, without the fear of military action that would require us to maintain a full alert at all times. And deterrence did work in certain ways with certain people. Even in 73, the kind of war that Sadat launched against Israel, the very limited military effort to just cross the canal, shake us out of our complacency, get the international community moving, get the Americans moving, was based on the realization that he cannot actually achieve the reconquest of Sinai or the destruction of Israel. That was already beyond his reach, Egypt's reach, the Arab world's reach, for reasons that they were fully aware of by 1973. And we don't need to go into detail, but it's a psychological construct that was and is on their minds. But when you are dealing with hybrid organizations, such as Hamas, such as Hezbollah in Lebanon, essentially terrorist organizations that happen to have taken control, effective control of a territory, their calculus is different. And I think in the case of Hamas, they faced what they saw as an opportunity that may never return. Israel seemed to be in shambles, internally in deep, divisive crisis. Even the military fraying at the edges as a result of that crisis, on one hand. On the other hand, they also saw what they consider an existential danger. Israeli-Saudi normalization and Israel's acceptance in the region becoming much more, compelling for action than the perception of Israeli deterrence. So you put these two elements together and you get October 23.
Dr. Arad, Arab scholars dismiss what they see as a Western view of Orientalists. But there is a difference between Occidental and Oriental, and perhaps the Israeli mistake was that Israel looked at the calculus which Eran Lerman brought up in a Western way of thinking. The result of a clash between Egypt or Hamas with Israel will obviously be an Israeli victory. Therefore, the other side would not dare do it because the results will be negative from our point of view of how we look at his point of view. However, the other side, being Muslim or being Arab or being Oriental, thinks also about the process and not only about the result. And if the process is showing the domestic audience there or the entire Arab world that they are resisting, that they may lose another round, but that they justify the resistance, the sacrifices, then they don't mind losing what we will consider losing, and therefore they will not be deterred.
Well, Amir, let me first clarify a few conceptual things and then respond about the Islamic or terrorist context. Look, the concept deterrence has become a central conceptual construct after the introduction of nuclear weapons, not before. And the reason is simple. It has to do with some of the qualities of such weapons. That is to say, the introduction of nuclear weapons brought into the game very destructive weapons, sometimes popularly called weapons of mass destruction, such that by a single application of one, you may affect the death of many, many, many. Now, that became an instrument in which a country felt compelled to bring about not that it would not be attacked even once, to sustain the thought that such a weapon can be applied on you, causing such large numbers of casualties, becomes an imperative to prevent even one single use. That is not the case with weapons which are much lower on the level of intensity. To give you an example, if I want to deter, say, a terrible terrorist attack that would kill, say, 200 civilians, as happened, say, in Lockerbie or anything. Well, between us here, such an attack does not affect the survivability of a nation. It is not an existential. If it happens, well, that's too bad, but there is no real imperative. When you say, I want to deter that, it is not, you don't really have to. You can take it in stride. That is not the case with the bigger weapons.
But
secondly, the only way to create a calculus that would make an enemy not use such thing is to say that if he does that, he would receive a retaliatory thing that would be at least at an equal, if not greater, degree of destructiveness. And now, why is that? Is because there is no real defense from missiles carrying nuclear weapons.
There is an old story in the form of a question. How do you hunt red elephants in Africa? It's almost impossible. So you catch a regular elephant and you paint it red, and then you catch it.
But
the analogy is that because of what you said, because there is deterrence against nuclear weapons, we're talking about the Soviet-American rivalry, and the sub-nuclear, the conventional game is still going on. We, the Americans, should warn the Soviets that if they try to attack us conventionally, we will escalate immediately to the nuclear arena. This is what was called massive retaliation, but it didn't work because these are two different domains.
Let's talk about the fundamental conceptual attributes of what we're talking about, not about the many variations in the application in different theaters and in different things. The point is that it is in the nature of weapons of mass destruction that you must bring about the non-use of them, and that in order to affect the calculus of the other side, you have to level such a threat that it would make that enemy not even think of doing that. That is the basic equation. Now, the problem here that then the retaliatory strike must also be nuclear. And that is why it became the basic tenet throughout the Cold War. And that remains the logic. We will have to address that issue when we discuss about the current situation in the world, in which, first, you see different varieties of nuclear weapons. You find we are now into the fourth nuclear age, It is a multipolar world. You have many nuclear countries. Some of them go to the other side of the spectrum, try to design lower yield weapons to try to do the nuclear, but coming very close and very low. This is the nature of the particular terrain now. But when you talk about the Israeli mistake, first, it used the language of deterrence to say, to apply it to a condition of a very low intensity conflict in Gaza, employing the concept to which it was not at all used. Now we come to the psychological thing and to the cultural thing. Of course, it is a psychological. So when you try to figure out the calculus, the cost benefit, the assumption is that there is a cost benefit, that the only way you deter is you make it less profitable to the other side. But in which terms? Now, that can vary. Say, if you could say only if a society is suicidal completely, and in fact they want to die gloriously, then you get no hinge. But this is not the case. But you do have to factor into this. First, their propensity to take costs. You don't really know. You have to calculate each and one's specific calculation. The fact that you destroy high-rising houses in the expectation that this will make them desist is ridiculous. So what comes in here, I think Amnon and most of my friends here would agree, there is no alternative to have as good as a perceptive understanding, also based on intelligence and based on everything you can put your hands on, what is really the calculus, and then you calibrate your whatever cost policy to adapt to that. So it is a very difficult task. The use of deterrence, I would employ that only in the context of the nuclear thing, avoiding, on the other side, talk about the cost-benefit terms. And in both cases, you have an immense need of understanding what makes the other side tick.
Ambassador
and you
Ayalon,
have to take into account the cultural. Here, we erred badly.
Ambassador Ayalon, first of all, thank you for yielding half of your time to
your questions.
You were ambassador to Washington when George W. Bush was president. And part of deterrence is against, or at least vis-a-vis, friends, allies, maybe beneficiaries. When the Sharon government had to decide about its counter-terror policy, and you were there, and obviously one of the considerations was what would President Bush do if Prime Minister Sharon does so and so? How was there deterrence because of the so-called Jewish lobby or any other factor, as far as you remember?
Well, deterrence vis-a-vis allies, of course, is always palpable, certainly when you have a client state and a superpower. I would say that Sharon was quite deterred by how Bush would react to different scenarios here, but all changed after 9/11. After 9/11, Sharon believed that, on the one hand,
which is a fine example of bin Laden not being deterred
Absolutely.
by the perceived might of
Why
the
do you use
superpower.
the word deterrence in this context?
This is the topic of this show.
But- and
We will keep pushing it,
And political,
no matter what.
political considerations between two allies, you employ this explosive word.
This was supposed to be his response.
yeah, so, okay, so now I'll have to, since you mentioned that I had to yield my time to Uzi, it's not going to come without a price. So let me,
He was not deterred.
let me take a little issue with what Uzi said, which I respect very much. But I do not believe that deterrence has anything to do with cultural orientation, ideology, East-West, or anything else. I think deterrence is something which is very realistic, and it's done by, maybe it should be, instead of deterrence, talking about net assessment. Because Deterrence is a matter of net assessment. If you believe that you're inferior to your rival, you will not act until you feel you're strong enough. I would say that what you mentioned, and rightly so, during the Cold War, the MED, the mutual
Assured destruction.
destruction, this was a deterrence in its purest sense. But from time immemorial, there was never, ever deterrence. And if there was a deterrence, it had an expiration date. The Roman Empire...
You mean Cain was not deterred by divine punishment?
Exactly. But let's go back to the 2,000 years, Roman Empire. Roman Empire had deterrence over all its neighbors, let's say, but it had an expiration date until it didn't have deterrence. You can say that the British Empire had deterrence over its colonies.
How do they call it?
Wait a minute.
In English or Latin?
White man's burden.
Yes. No, I'll tell you what. No, it's not a matter of calling them. It's a matter of practicing it. I'll tell you how they practiced it. Just imagine a British soldier walking, the streets of New Delhi, let's say, with knee-high socks, woolen socks, shorts, and one stick. That's it. Everybody, gave him all the honor. They wouldn't even risk, challenging him until it wasn't deterrence. And
because Japan showed that the brown or yellow man can defeat the white man.
Absolutely. So what I want to say is that there is no deterrence. The deterrence is the exceptional to the rule, and we should stop thinking about deterrence because of what Amnon said, 73, 23, and it's not just here. You can go to North Korea, to Korea, anywhere else.
Let's move to...
I want to...
Yeah, go ahead, Eran.
Very quickly. First of all, there is absolute deterrence. You say, we are not going to do this, ever. And I cannot do this. I think actually 73 is, paradoxically, if you want an example of strategic deterrence, while tactically looking for a way to change an existing situation, realizing that the ultimate goal of destroying Israel is no longer within your reach because of deterrence. But that's more or less, without saying too much, Uzi's realm of argumentation. But there's also a lower level of deterrence where you say, we're going to destroy, for example, we're going to destroy Israel sooner or later, but not this week. Because right now the balance of power doesn't work that way. So let's put it off. And that worked between Israel and Hezbollah since 2006 for 17 years.
So hold it.
And then there's even the use of specific means. Look at how Hezbollah started this war with a very limited set of actions.
So Eran, that's the question which I hope General Sofrin can answer, because we want to talk about current affairs. And throughout this week, of course, there was this discourse in the Israeli cabinet, but also in public, especially with the residents of the northern part of Israel, regarding what would happen should the ceasefire agreement with Lebanon comes into force, and then the other side violates it. Does Israel, in your mind, have some residual deterrent power to make Hezbollah think twice or more about violating this agreement?
I'm not sure that this is the situation right now. I believe that Hezbollah was very bad hit during this fighting since October 8, 2023. They suffered a lot of casualties. All the leadership is demolished, and a great part of their arsenal is destroyed. Nevertheless, they won't give up. They won't disappear. They will stay there in Lebanon. The Iranians will arm them or rearm them in the coming years, and they will stay there forever. Now, the fact that they are now at least vulnerable more than they used to be before, some months ago, doesn't mean that we have deterrence power upon them. That means that when time comes, they will rebuild their capabilities, and they will be able to serve the masters in Tehran regarding what we call armed clash between Israel and Iran and to assist and to be the first one to respond. And I'm not sure that Israel has a deterrent power upon them. And I hope I'm not wrong. I don't see Israel responding to any violation, small violation in Lebanon immediately and harshly. Just like we try to imagine that this is what is going to be the next future, I don't see it is happening because we know ourselves. We will contain some of their aspects, and the containment will grow on and on and on and on until.
But for the first time, probably, the Israeli government does not have control over the destiny of its citizens because the 60,000 or so residents have essentially a veto power over the cabinet decision. If they are not going back, then the government cannot claim that it has managed not a total victory, it's a total tie, a total draw. So how could it justify the result except as a gift for President Trump?
I don't think that they could justify it. They will try to convince the people to get back because it is safe, because we are going to deploy more units along the border. We are going to reinforce our capabilities there. We are going to deny any attempt of somebody to try to launch an anti-tank missile or a rocket into your places. And with these promises, people will slowly and slowly begin coming back. Not all of them, of course. Part of them will stay wherever they are. They won't be able or won't want to get back to their own houses because of these reasons. But some of them will be able to get back. It will take a few years because you have to reconstruct, for example, Manara, which is already almost destroyed totally, and you have to rebuild it, and you have to rebuild Metula and other places as well. It will take about 2 to 3 years. And within 2 to 3 years, Hezbollah will be deployed north to the Litani River with some mechanisms that will be designed with the U.S. as guarantees upon the Hezbollah rearming and so on, and hope for good.
Dr. Lerman, what about third-party deterrence or indirect deterrence? There are several examples throughout Israel's history in the 1950s when there was infiltration from the Jordanian border, today's West Bank, under Israeli control, and Israel tried to hit military and police targets so that the Amman government will try to block these infiltrations. Then in the 1960s, when there were other infiltrations by terrorists sent by Syria via Jordan, again, the Samoa operation, Israel trying to force Jordan, and there are other examples. What happens if now the Hamas elements in Lebanon or other organizations violate the Israel-Hezbollah agreement, fire from Lebanon into Israel, not from Gaza, and Israel considering whether this is a violation which to which Israel must respond, or whether, because it is not Hezbollah per se, to let it go?
Well, I think first of all, there's an essential question of what has changed in Israel in the outlook of the defense establishment, of the intelligence community, but ultimately at the top leadership level, as a result of the 7th of October. So the strategy of containment and the assumption of deterrence has gone out of the window in I think, a fairly decisive way. And everything depends. And this is why Israel was so insistent on this side letter to be written by the outgoing American administration with the full cognizance of the incoming administration. I think on this there's Mossad Boulos or others who are acting for Trump, coordinating the position. This side letter secures Israel's right to no longer tolerate the kind of things that it tolerated until the 7th of October. We tolerated the Hezbollah tents on Israeli soil. in the eastern approaches of Hardor.
Before October 7th.
Before October 7th. This is no longer going to be tolerable, neither politically nor strategically. So I think we may see a profound change. But I also want to go back to the future of Lebanon more generally. What happens now is not the final act. It's the first act in a bid to change the balance of power in Lebanon. Because here I go back to Uzi's term. Let's leave deterrence aside. Cost-benefit. The cost-benefit calculus is different. There's a spectrum of how do you calculate cost and benefit. In a realistic world, where a country takes care of its basic national interests, it works in one way. But in a situation driven by identity politics, ideological, religious, whichever way, but you can look at it, German national suicide in World War II. When you are driven by identity factors, you reverse the cost-benefit analysis. Let me give you a very trite example. The reason you buy a pickup truck is you calculate that for the cost of the truck and petrol, you can carry stuff from here to there. When you buy a Lamborghini, which costs much more, you're not calculating where you're going with it or how much it will cost.
And how much produce you can put
in the trunk. You're basically extending your manhood or whatever. This is an identity act.
We also have female viewers,
Right.
so
Yes,
maybe
I doubt if they buy the Lamborghinis.
extending their femininity. Yeah.
But it's an identity act. You reverse the cost-benefit analysis. The more they will charge you for the Lamborghini or for the plastic banana on the wall, to use another example, the more you pay for it, the more it becomes valuable for you. In identity politics, because that's who you are. It speaks not to what you do, but it's not doing, it's being. So in the cost-benefit analysis, when it is reversed by ideology, this is where deterrence fails.
I wonder whether Yahya Sinwar had the same philosophy class which you attended. Maybe his considerations were more primitive.
Other than Lamborghini.
But it was certainly his. But look, if the ultimate
There was
prize,
this hermit with the Ferrari, not the Lamborghini.
no, but the ultimate example I can give, and this is back in our territory, is the promotion from Yahya Sinwar to the Shahid Yahya Sinwar, in which you pay the ultimate price for your identity.
But only once.
Once, yes.
One shot.
Danny, you for a while were a politician. Deputy Foreign Minister, that means that you were a member of Knesset, and you served in a Netanyahu government, but in a different party, different Knesset list. What we have now in Israel is that the Prime Minister is being deterred by two of his coalition partners. How does it work?
Well, again, it goes back to the goals and to the basic fears of a politician. And it also makes a difference whether you're talking about a politician or a statesman. A statesman is someone that, at least internally, would not be deterred because he would work for the total benefit of the country and not himself or herself. In the case of the deterrence of Netanyahu, it comes, the expense we all, the entire Israeli people, pay for this deterrence, which is, I believe, very, very self-centered and just clinging to power. And that is it. And I think this is something that should not be practiced when you talk to your own people. There shouldn't be a deterrence when you talk to your own people, even if it is political. And Churchill, he wouldn't have minded serving with Chamberlain in the same government, or with even Halifax after, the peace in our time, Munich, 1930.
One of your predecessors as ambassador to Washington.
Yes, absolutely.
Excellent to
Right.
Washington.
So I would say here it's a very poor deterrence and miserable deterrence, and it shouldn't be.
Uzi, most of us here,
I want to ask myself a question and then answer it.
and who will answer? You, Uzi?
You will
Okay.
I'm very troubled by this very loose usage of the word deterrence as applied to everything. Suddenly everything is deterrence.
But we are already taping this show. We can't go back now.
No. Oh, yes, but this is causing a blurring of something, and it has consequences, including we're talking about serious stuff.
Elections have consequences.
Okay, it reminds me of the fashion back in the 60s and 70s when system analysis became the buzz, and suddenly everything was a system. Everything was a system. You don't go to the classroom, you go to a system. So now deterrence is applied to, listen, one has to
Domestic
be
relations.
very clear. Not every case in which one side conveys a message to another side don't means necessarily a deterrence posture. Secondly, even refine it further. The deterrent usually involves a threat in which you say don't or else. Now, naturally, threats are not the common language in the orderly conduct of life.
Implied threats could be.
But that's not the language. You don't. Usually, you work with inducements. Please do that, and I'll reward you. To say don't do that, or I'll punish you, that is more the language among adversaries.
Wasn't Biden's don't a deterrent?
Of course, it was. It was a pure case.
No inducement.
It was a demonstration he brought there to the power. He was very specific what he meant, and in order to convey the message, he made it very short. He didn't even say what it is that is not to be done, because it was all contained in the thing. Now, and let me explain the Lebanese context and the right application of the word. What it is that we really have to deter, usually the things that are very bad to us. Now, what is very bad to us in this overall context is that Iran claims and says that it wants to destroy us. Now, and they say so, they declare so, and here and there they act in that direction. Now, that is a very unhappy condition to be in. That is a worthy objective to deter. Namely, we do not want them even to try. Now, so far, near as we can tell, their development of nuclear capacity was not intended for them to use it to bring about our destruction. That they were deterred even from the beginning, knowing that this would carry consequences. But over the years, they did develop a theory in which they could bring about Israel's demise, not necessarily through the heavy bombing, but this theory that pressure from its vicinity in a kind of an attrition situation would make Israel, as somebody said, unlivable. Unlivable, and that's a precise. They saw us leaving the country, and in so doing, collapsing. And to that effect, the Hezbollah has been an instrument for two purposes. One is to deter Israel from preempting an attack in Iran, so that we would think twice before we do that preemptively to Iran, because they have an effect to bring about punishment on us, which is heavy. That was one purpose. And the other purpose was to join in the game in which it, with other proxies, engage in this kind of war of attrition. Now, how does Israel go about deterring the Hezbollah now? Let me just conclude. There is only one way of doing that. You say to the Hezbollah, listen, it is true that if you restore your capacity, you can again harass us. You can do that again. You know what? If you do it successfully on behalf of the Iranians, we really may come to the point in which the country would bleed. For example, become unlivable. But that is the thing we want to prevent. So think twice. The ultimate deterrent would be leveled right now. Say, if Israel is ever destroyed, it would come at the expense of your own destruction. So don't start the slow process. It would lead nowhere.
And in one word, don't.
Yes.
We are deterred by the clock. just because deterrence has been belittled here, just a few words from your General
It's been
Sofrin.
elevated.
Yes. Because Israel knows that the Arab and Muslim war against it may be eternal, deterring it for several years, having an interval, isn't that a worthy cause too?
It is part of what they call the security or defense doctrine. That means that you have to maintain kind of deterrence and to say that if you try to do something, we are going to pay very bad.
General Dr. Sofrin, Colonel Dr. Lerman, Dr. Uzi Arad, Ambassador Ayalon, thank you all. This has been another issue of Powers in Play from TV7 News Israel. We will be back with another edition next month. For the time being, shalom from Jerusalem.